East and West learning connections.
Helps people of different cultures break barriers and connect with each other.
Together, let's make learning and connections happen.
Together, we make cross-cultural learning and connections happen.
Yeah, today is a session 2 out of 12 session. Today's topic is identifying business opportunities in Canada. Find the opportunity, which is a good beginning. Here you go, Martin, please.
Thank you, Frank, and thanks for the kind introduction. And it's a pleasure to be back with some that are new and some that have been on these lectures before. So as Frank alluded to, the topic tonight is identifying business opportunities in Canada. If you recall, the last lecture we had together was an introduction to entrepreneurship in Canada. And I was delighted to share some content with everybody, and hopefully they got something out of it. And so I'll mention at the very front end of this topic, number 2, is that I am open to any questions, whether that come out through the chat or whether that's addressed verbally through audio. Frank or Young can unmute you, and I'm happy to have a conversation. And whether it's in regards or related to the topic of this evening or not, I'm very, very happy to give you whatever knowledge I can share with you about any topic. So we'll begin tonight. Again, I really took a little bit of time to try and take this from an angle of predominantly a Chinese immigrant coming to Canada, starting a business, because I feel it will be most beneficial to most people. Most of what I'm going to say would be appropriate for any person, let alone an immigrant coming, let alone a Chinese immigrant. But I tried to put a little bit of focus on that because there's some unique advantages coming. If you're coming from China, you've been here a short period of time, you're wanting to start a business, there's some unique advantages to that. And I'll start with what we call the elephant in the room before I actually get into addressing the full topic. And the elephant in the room is more or less what's happened, obviously, in the world right now. Everybody's quite aware of, call it maybe it's the chaos, the turmoil that's going on a little bit, and in particular, what's happening with things like tariffs. Here's the good news, and this is kind of what I predicted I've done it in writing, I've done it verbally to a number of people. My prediction was at the very beginning, going back, 100 days ago when there was a change in the political scene, is that there would be, a lot of turbulence, a lot of chaos, but my prediction was that it was all going to turn back into some very positive territory and that things would settle and things would turn very positive. In fact, I would make the argument right now that the next anywhere between 4 to 12 years worth of business is going to probably be the best business environments since World War II. I think if you're looking to go into a business, now is a great time to go into it. And I think things are going to get very positive in the world. And I think it's already been somewhat addressed by the fact that, again, the elephant in the room being that, the US and China have come to an agreement to some degree. And all the concerns about bringing things in and, the business, importing things from China, which obviously is a huge, business for a lot of people, have been somewhat dismissed. And I think we're back to square one. And I think we can also understand that hopefully within the next 90 days, if a final agreement is reached and it seems relatively fair and the tariffs drop down to as low as I think they might, it'll not only be business as usual, but I think there's a huge opportunity for both import and export. And so I look at that very positively and tell you that I think the business climate is going to be incredible and it's a great time to start a business. So I just wanted to get that out to everybody. And with that in mind, now go through the topic, which again is identifying business opportunities in Canada. So let's start off by understanding the Canadian business landscape. So we talked a little bit about this in the introduction, and I'll repeat a little bit, and then we'll go on to the new stuff. So why Canada? Um, Canada has one of the most stable economies with very, very strong support for small business. So it's a great reason to do business in Canada. It also has a very diverse population with opportunities to serve both mainstream and ethnic markets. There's lots of government incentives for entrepreneurs, including funding programs. And there are many growing industries, such as technology, e-commerce, real estate, and green energy. So Canada offers a very secure and very supportive environment for businesses. It's a little bit slower than in China, which is a much more competitive, much more furious a landscape than Canada. So Canada does offer a secure and supportive environment for business, but understanding the market trends is critical for success. Because if you don't understand the trends here, then it really doesn't matter. So the next thing is, what are the methods for identifying business opportunities? Okay, well, when you're identifying a business opportunity, the first thing you want to do is find something that what does what? It solves a problem and addresses or addresses a market gap. So what do we mean by that? You want to look for what's called unmet customer needs or inefficiencies in the market. I had, and I'm not sure if that person's on this call, and not to pick on them or pick them out, but I know we had somebody who was I think a Montessori teacher, and she had identified an opportunity, which was, 80% of the students in Montessori were their needs were being met by the fact that they were in school, they were doing okay, they were average students, but it didn't meet the needs of those students who needed either extra help or those who were just so super intelligent that they really needed a higher level of education. So all of a sudden, it created an unmet customer need, and that there were inefficiencies in the teaching. You couldn't teach everybody, and it created another opportunity for an individual perhaps to start a different type of teaching, a different business, teaching students who are either very advanced or those who are a little bit behind. So that's just an example of unmet customer needs or inefficiencies. Okay. So another example is well, let me move on from there. So the other thing you want to do is to leverage your personal skills and experience. So think about, what is your expertise? We were just talking earlier, and one of our participants is just graduating a course out of the US, and she's going to have a new level of expertise. It's going to be certified. So what's your previous experience? What's your professional background? So an example would be if you were an engineer from China, and this is somebody who actually started a business here. They were an engineer from China. They started a solar energy consulting firm. So that's another thing you want to look at, is you want to leverage your personal skills and your experience. The next thing is, you want to adapt successful business models, potentially from China or from other regions, right? So look at, the things that you've seen that have been successful in the past. If you've just come into the country, you bring a wealth of information with you of what worked in the past, what were the businesses that worked in the past, and maybe you can bring them to Canada. So that's another, avenue for you to look and explore to open a business here. The other thing is to explore government-supported industries. Canada promotes sectors like technology, clean energy, healthcare, agriculture. So you might want to look to see what those supported industries are. And there are government grants out there that exist for things like sustainable businesses and green energy solutions. So that's another way of looking at starting your business. The other thing that you can look at is the emerging trends and consumer behavior. So you want to research the trends right now, such as e-commerce, remote work, eco-friendly products, digital marketing. Those are all things that you can research in terms of starting a business. So right now, more Canadians prefer online shopping. I think everybody knows that. So things like drop shipping and digital service are in very, very high demand right now. And given the fact that, I think, as I said earlier, I think the tariffs are going to not only return back to normal, I think you're going to have an even higher opportunity than you did in the past. So drop shipping and digital services are going to be in very high demand in the future, and probably for a length of time. So the key takeaway from that is that business opportunities come from solving problems, leveraging skills, adapting ideas, and following trends. Those are the four things you want to look at. So let's move on to how do you evaluate your business ideas? What makes a good opportunity, right? So the first thing you want to look at are things like market demand. Okay. Is there enough customers? Very simple questions. This isn't complicated. Is there enough customers who need your product or service? So there's all, and we'll talk about this a little later, but there's all kinds of ways to determine that. But it's a very, very important question. Are there enough customers who need the product or service? The second thing you want to look at is, are there existing businesses that are meeting that demand, or is there a gap? So what you're looking for is that gap or underserviced type product or service. You're looking for something where there is a demand. And I'll give you another example of this. Is supposing you had even like a bubble tea shop, right? And you sat and said, well, if I open up in Toronto, it's super saturated. There's so many here, it's going to be problematic. But if you start looking at places like Guelph or London, Ontario, or things like that, you might want to look at the demographics, see how many people are there, see how many people that might be, buyers of bubble tea. And it could be that that particular population in that particular city or town is underserviced by the fact that there are no bubble tea restaurants there, that type of thing. So you want to look at market demand, understand what it is, do a competitive analysis. And again, in your competitive analysis, you want to ask questions like, who are the main competitors and how can you differentiate? We talked last time, and I've talked always about the word disruption. Is how can you disrupt an existing business? If you can't find a gap, if you can't find the need, then the question might be is, okay, if I can't find the need, how can I find the disruption? How can I find something that differentiates me from that product or service? So you want to look at that, and you want to try and figure out what is it that can make you be a little bit different than your competition. Okay. You can also do things like a SWOT analysis, which is an examination of your strength, your weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats. So that's another way, is doing a SWOT analysis, which stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. You want to do that as a potential business owner to understand, what you're headed into. What are your strengths? What are the weaknesses? What are the opportunities? What are the threats? What's the competition, et cetera, et cetera. Then another thing you want to look at is profitability and costs. What are the startup costs? What are the operational costs? What are the expected profits? So as an example, if you went into the consulting business, it's very low startup costs, right? Very easy. You go in, you have a computer, you're a consultant, right? And so you can get into that business with very low startup costs, whereas a restaurant, okay, requires a much more significant investment. So here's the pluses and minuses of low startup costs versus high startup costs. You have low startup costs, it's easy to get into the business. The problem with it, it's easy to get into the business, which means that the competition can be fierce. A lot of people can get into that business very easy. What's the plus and minus of something that requires significant investment? It's very difficult for somebody to get in a business if they don't have the money necessary to open that business. Having said that, the good side of that is that if you have the money, then it has a much higher barrier to the entrance for a person to get in that business. So again, if you have a significant investment, like something like a restaurant, the plus side is it's going to could be potentially very hard for somebody else to get in and compete with you because they may not have the money to open a restaurant. But on the negative side, it costs you a lot of money. So that's the pluses and minuses of a low cost startup versus a higher cost startup. And then, of course, the one other thing you want to look at is, what is the scalability and long-term potential of the business? Can the business grow over time, or is it just profitable in the short run? So if you pick something that has a very short length of time to it. As an example, if you decide that you're going to sell, if the Toronto Maple Leafs, which I think they're playing tonight, if they were lucky enough to win the Stanley Cup, and you decide that the only thing you're ever going to sell is Toronto Maple Leafs, sweatshirts with a Stanley Cup on it, well, you might only be able to sell those for a few months, and then you have to figure out another plan to sell the next sweatshirts. But the whole idea here is that, the product or service you pick, what is the longevity of it? Is it something that's scalable? Can you build on it? Can you find more people to do the same thing? So scalability is very, very important, and the future potential of the sale is very, very important. So the key takeaway here is a good business idea is profitable, it's scalable, and it fills a market gap. Okay. So now let's talk a little bit about best business opportunities for immigrant entrepreneurs in Canada. So in general, and again, the emphasis here is mostly on small business. I can do a whole session on large business, but that's a whole different situation. If if you have a product or service that you think is going to be a multi-million dollar business, and you want to put together the right business proposal, and find the PEs and the private equity guys or the venture capitalists, and you want to find rounds of funding and come up with the idea, it really, really requires this incredible business proposal. It requires an incredible network to find somebody who's willing to put in millions of dollars into your idea, but it's possible. But the problem with it is that for every 100 small businesses that open, or 500 businesses, one of these opens. So we're going to focus tonight more on opening a small business and growing it than actually looking for, major financing to fund something that could be huge, okay, which will cover off 99% of you, right? So the best business opportunities for immigrant entrepreneurs in Canada, one of the first ones is a service-based business. Okay. Why a service-based business? Because it's very low startup costs. So as an example, food and beverage would be one area. Things like, food trucks,
¿Quieres
catering.
oírlo?
Sorry,
Sorry.
was there a question or was that just a comment?
Okay.
I'll keep going.
No, that's okay.
Okay, we'll keep going. Okay, so you may want to look at a service-based restaurant because it's low a service-based business because of the low startup cost. So if you are opening a smaller restaurant, let's say, something that was much smaller, like a takeout restaurant or a food truck or a catering or bubble tea shop, that type of thing. So food and beverage would be one place where startup costs aren't incredibly high, especially if you start with a smaller shop, right? And again, if you were starting out, my recommendation wouldn't be go out and buy all the equipment you need. My recommendation would be go and lease the equipment, right? Usually, instead of spending 20 or 30 or $50,000 to buy the equipment, you can usually go through a company where, and I have one, not myself, but I know of one, where you can basically go to them and they will lease the equipment for you. And so usually it's a minimum of 1 or 2 years, and they'll buy the equipment, they'll lease it to you. So you just have a monthly cost, just like buying a car. You go out and buy your equipment, you pay them 500,000 bucks a month. You can lease a premises. So the reality is, you can get into these things. If you're smart, you can get into these things for very little money down, but you will have a monthly cost with interest. But hopefully, if your business is good enough, you'll be able to cover that cost and make some profitability as well. The other area is personal services. Things like cleaning, tutoring, translation, photography, beauty services are just examples of those. And the third would be consulting, as we talked about earlier. Things like immigration services, career coaching, financial consulting, those types of things. So that would be one type of business, one type of business area that you can start in. Another one would be online and e-commerce businesses. And we talked a little bit about that earlier, and things like drop shipping. Okay. So one thing that's great about drop shipping is that you carry no inventory, right? You can sell the products online and without handling any inventory. And really, you're just working with, once a product gets sold, the company that you are buying it from would ship it directly to the customer, and you would take the difference between what you sell it for and what you pay for it. And it's a huge business right now, drop shipping. Some of the places that you could look, to go into business, and tools that you can use to carry forth on a drop shipping idea might be something like Amazon or Shopify. Opening an Amazon or Shopify store could be a way. And you could import products. Thankfully, it looks like you can import products from China and sell them in Canada. Like that would be a great way. And I'm sure you all are aware of this. It's just finding the right product, finding the right service is another story. That's why you have to look at all the other things we talked about earlier tonight. Another area would be social media and digital marketing. And I think we have a young lady in here who's going into that business. And that's an area where you could help businesses market on WeChat, Instagram, TikTok, through LinkedIn, a variety of different places, and create a really good digital social media campaign. If you do that well, you can make a lot of money very quickly. And again, it's just a question of having the right product to sell to the right audience, which and identifying that as we talked about earlier, using those techniques. Another area is technology and innovation. So you can provide services like IT consulting and software development. So you could do web development, you could do mobile apps, you can provide AI solutions. And while we're on that topic, again, it's another big elephant in the room. Um, I just wanted to really talk about AI just for a brief second because it is kind of the topic of the day. So AI will be the next .com. It is that big, and it is that much of a disruption. It really is the next major disruption. So are we in the .com era? We are, but let's not make the same mistake as we did with .com. Everybody thought .com would happen in 1 year. It would all happen in the year 2000. And as we found out, not only did it, that everybody was right. .com was the next disruption, but everybody thought where they were wrong was the duration. Everyone thought it happened in 1 year, and quite frankly, the .com era is still going, 25 years later. So it's the same with AI. AI is maybe going to be a little bit faster, probably going to be somewhere between, I'm guessing, 7 to 10 years max. But the way it's going to go down is like this. There's going to be three phases to it. And it's important you understand this because it's going to have a major impact on any product or service you sell. No matter what you're doing, it's going to impact it. So it's going to start out with AI. Everybody knows that that's artificial intelligence. But what's next? What's after AI? Well, what's next is something called AGI. AGI stands for artificial general intelligence. And AGI is generally the measure, it's a measure of when AI is at a level that's about equivalent to humans. So in other words, not much more advanced than humans, but not less advanced, about on par with humans. That will be called AGI. So we're transitioning now from AI to AGI. Once we achieve AGI, which will probably be, I'm guessing when I say this, but somewhere in the next 2 to 4 or 5 years, something like that. From there, the next advancement will be to something called ASI. And ASI is when you get into the supermodel, right? That's when AI, it's called artificial superintelligence. That's ASI, artificial superintelligence. And that's when AI becomes smarter than human beings. That's when it supersedes us and is able to do things that we can't, compute things we can't. And ASI, I'm guessing, anywhere from the next 3 to 7 years, something like that. So how will that affect, as an example, let's go back to that Montessori example where you sit there and say, well, if we get to AGI or ASI, where basically it can teach our students equally or better than a teacher, where does that leave us as a teacher? Does that wipe out all teachers? No, not if we're smart. Because the one thing that technology won't do is it'll never replace that human interaction, that emotional connection to each other. And you can really advantage this stuff if you get smart about it. You use AI, use AGI, use ASI to your favor. And the way you do it is say, okay, AI can teach this class. It can answer all the questions better than me. But what it can't do is it can't have an overall discussion about how we feel about what we've learned. So we can learn about the forest and the trees, but from ASI can tell us every tree, can tell us what it can tell us how a tree grows, how long it lives, the type of tree it is, when it lives, when it dies. It can tell us all the important facts. But what you can't have is a discussion with other people. You're not going to have a discussion necessarily with ASI about the emotional effect of how do you feel when you see the trees, and or what can what activities can you do when there's a whole bunch of trees around like that type of thing. So maybe not the best example, but I think you all understand what I'm saying. So if you take the human element, the one thing that ASI doesn't provide, and you add that human element to ASI and to complement it, you can have an amazing business in the same field. So what you want to do is you want to transition. If you're a teacher, you want, or you have a teaching business, you want to transition that business to utilize AI, AGI, ASI as it comes along, while at the same time add that greater part of the human element to it to create a rounded delivery of education that involves both the technical educational side with the emotional side. And you can have a very, very successful business if you're able to do that. So a little bit of a diversion there, but I felt it was important we address that. Let's also look at things like real estate and investment. You can go into things, what's very big and very popular now is going into things like property management, where you can manage rental properties for investors. And think about the advantage you might have if you can, if you can speak, if you have an area that's ethnic and you can speak the language of that ethnicity and you're able to communicate with those people. Well, if I'm a guy that owns a lot of properties and I don't have the language or the understanding of the culture, I'm going to need somebody who does in order to manage those properties. So you can play a very, very important role in the area of property management, and you can set up your own property management company. It's not overly involved in terms of costs to get engaged in it, but there's quite a bit of money to be made in that particular business. The other area is real estate development. And that's just simple buying and flipping properties. There's pluses and minuses that. It is, I would call it higher risk for sure. So you have to really know what you're doing, really understand the marketplace, understand the environment, the culture that's within that environment, what you really forecast for what that area is going to become. So there's a bunch of factors, and also, how the economy is going to go. As I said earlier, I think the economy is going to be fantastic for the next several years. I think real estate is going to not only hold, but I think it's going to come back. I think everything's going to come back. So I think it's a good time to get into that business as well, but it is a little bit more risky. So the key takeaways here are that service-based businesses, e-commerce, tech startups, and real estate are great opportunities for immigrant entrepreneurs. Let's talk a little bit about tools and resources for market research, because we talked a lot about getting information to make your decisions earlier, but I haven't really shared with you where you can get that information from. So let me do that now. So one of the first places you can get that from is Statistics Canada. They're a really, really good source. They provide market data and economic trends. So you can go to Stats Canada, you go to their website and get a whole bunch of information. You can also look at things like Google Trends. Google Trends identifies rising consumer trends. And you can also look at the Government of Canada business grants. And you can find funding for programs for startups. Government's a great place to go if you're looking for some funding. They're not going to come out and hand you $10 million, but you can get funding anywhere from a few $1,000s up to $1 million, $2 million from government programs if you fit the bill. And so you've got to do your research. You've got to fill out your applications. And there's actually a profession called grant writing, where people out there as a profession write grants that's all they do. They write grants to foundations, to associations, to government. And that's a great way. In fact, we were talking earlier about fundraising, and maybe there's a little piece of this presentation that's good for our fundraising person here, is that she should look very heavily into becoming an expert at writing grants, which you can use to write both to government, to foundations, to associations, and try and secure. There's lots and lots and lots of available money from foundations. And if you're a good grant writer, you can extract quite a bit of it. So if you're looking at fundraising or supporting a nonprofit or a not-for-profit, two different words, two different types of organizations, which we can talk about another day. But if you're looking at doing that, one of the best ways is being a grant writer. So that's another way. And then another way is looking at what are called the small business centers. These are centers that give free business advice and mentorship, and there are all kinds of them. If you go on the internet or use a little bit of AI, just search out small business centers and you'd be shocked at how many there are. Along the same line, there's a lot of local business associations where you could connect with other entrepreneurs. So things like the Chamber of Commerce, the Board of Trade. There's I think the Young Leaders one. There's just a whole pile of associations, and they're very localized, right down to not just nationally, not just provincially, not just citywide, but actually down to the municipality. You can go, like as an example, in Richmond Hill and look for all the Richmond Hill business associations or the small business centers in Richmond Hill, and you can find things like the incubate. There are also incubators as well. So a lot of these things are free, and it's a great way also because a lot of mentors are look at these, will follow these companies, and they are people who have money. And so you in that network, you might find some people who are the smaller investors and or potential co-founders for you. As an example, you go to one of these associations and you're really good in you're a great engineer in solar power, and you meet somebody who's a great person in marketing, and you meet another person who's great in sales, and you meet a fourth person who's great in finance, and you become buddies, and all of a sudden you have four co-founders to form a company. So it's a great way, a really wonderful way to start a business. So the key takeaway here is use free tools and government resources to research and validate your business idea. So here's some final thoughts. I wanted to do this a little quicker tonight, which we've been a little better successful at, so we can open up this to as many questions and answers, because this is really to help you. It's not about me, it's about you, and it's about trying to provide answers to questions, whether it's about this topic or other. So final thoughts, and in terms of taking action and executing. And if you heard me, probably not last time, but the time before, I do almost a whole hour on the word execution. I believe that either you execute or you get executed, right? Execute or be executed. So you need to execute, because all of these ideas, all the sessions, even tonight's sessions, if you don't do something with this information, it's useless. It's only the person that executes that will be successful. And usually we say in business, 1 out of 100. So, if you look to the right and you look to the left tonight on your screen, and you figure that the person on the right and the person on the left isn't going to execute, maybe you're the one that is. So it's all about execution. And so here's my final thoughts. You want to identify a business based on your skills, the market demand, and the competition. You want to validate the idea with market research and feasibility analysis. And now you want to leverage government support, business networks, and available funding. Start small, be scalable, and then grow your business gradually. And with that, I'll throw it open to any questions and try and provide answers for you. So you can either ask your questions through the chat room, or you can ask them, and Frank or Young will unmute you, and we either have just a conversation or I'll answer from the chat room. So I'll turn it over to Frank to run the question and answer period. I hope this was helpful to you.
Yeah, Martin, I had a question typed in chat, which basically, can you elaborate on the, I know you listed Canadian consumer behavior, right? So I'm just saying a lot of companies, due to tariffs, they are considered start from US or Canada. In terms of consumer base, they have bigger base, but what about behavior? How different we are? Yeah.
So what's happened, and you can see it in Canada, is you know there's a different level of patriotism in every country. If you are familiar or you've been in the United States, you'll notice that it's a very, very patriotic. Everybody is very, very, everyone is American first, and then whatever else they are second. In Canada, it's always been kind of a reverse to that. However, what's happened over the past short while, and I say short while, I emphasize short while, because things get lost very quickly here. People forget very quickly. But what's happened is Canadian patriotism has picked up again, and it's picked up because we were threatened. And as a result of that, there's a sense of a portion, at least, of our community that's saying, you know what, we're going to buy Canadian. We're going to buy our services and products Canadian, and we're going to grow be strong and proud Canadians. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's great. But I will tell you that, again, you really have to look long term in a business. So I wouldn't call a tariff necessarily a trend right now. It's a short-term trend. I don't believe it's a long-term trend. I believe that what will happen is in a very short period of time, as soon as a deal is made, and a deal will be made, a deal will be made between Canada and the US, a deal will be made with all 130 countries that the US is challenged right now. Those deals will all get done. And my best guess is they'll all be done within the next 90 to 3 to 4 months. They'll all be done, most of them. And I think what you'll see is not only strength again, and there'll still be this conviction of Canadians to buy Canadian. But I think what happens is we all fall back into our old habits. So if we were used to buying a certain product, whether it's a certain wine, whether it's a certain food, whether it's a certain car, I think you'll find that if we were having this lecture and we were having it a year from now, a lot of those harsh feelings that we had probably will dissipate almost by 99%. So I would argue that if you're going into business today, I wouldn't pay, and there will be a lot of people that will disagree with me, but personally, and I can tell you I'm right, I can tell you with full passion and emotion that I'm right. I can tell you right now that in a year from now, what's happened as far as tariffs go won't matter. And I think you'll find that Canadians will go back to exactly the same habits because that's what people do. They return always to the same habits. Personalities don't change, behavior does. So everyone there's a behavior change right now. All right. The behavior change is that there's two things in business. There's personality of a business and a person, and there's behavior of a person and personality. So what's going to happen is right now there's a behavioral change because of outside influences, things like we've been threatened. So our behavior changes. But the personality of the person and the personality of our country will go back to what it is. Trust me when I say this because I've been seen it enough times. So it will go back and we will buy, the same goods in a year from now that we were buying a year before. It might change slightly, but not too much. So I would argue I wouldn't pay too much attention to sort of the turmoil that's going on right now. It will settle and things will go back to where they were. So I would conduct your business very much in the same way that you would have conducted it a year ago. I wouldn't change it too much today. And I think you're going to find all of the people right now, if you look at the big business that was so offside in the US for so many years and was so offside with the current election, and now all of a sudden they're flying, to Saudi Arabia. All of them are flying there to do business, right? It was a huge change of heart. People follow the money. Business is still about making money, and I think you're going to find that there's huge opportunities here. I think they're going to be very similar to a year ago, and I think they're going to be very similar in a year from now. This is a very short-term kind of switch in consumer sentiment that I think is very short-term and will change long-term. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. It kind of does because you live in both Canada and US, right? So you
I
get
do.
you have been seeing oscillations. You can make that yeah.
I will tell you this, and I say this only because it's documented. I work with a few different financial people. I wrote to one of them on Friday, and who deals with about, I don't know, 300 or 400 clients. And I said to him, I said, the U.S. and China are going to be meeting over the weekend, and I said, I guarantee you, Monday morning, if not before, there's going to be an announcement where they put together sort of not a final deal, but a 90% baked deal. That's what I said. And I said, I guarantee you it's going to happen. And I guarantee you that the stock market is going to go up huge on Monday. And that's exactly what happened. And I have it in writing. That's why I say I can say it. It's not just something I have an actual exchange in writing. And my financial guy said to me, he says, I've spoken with almost all of my clients. And he said, well, I agree with you, but I can't get one other client that does agree with you. They all disagree with you. They all disagree with you, but I agree with you, right? So we're the only two people that believe that. Well, as it turned out Monday morning, we were the two people that were right. And I'm not, again, trying to blow any smoke here or create, any thought that I have this great, sort of intuitive thinking power. It's just I follow this very, very closely, and I follow trends very closely, and I follow sentiment and consumer behavior very closely. So I get a really good sense intuitively of what's going to happen, and that's why I'm to a lot of people, I'm a pretty good barometer of what tomorrow might be. And I'm telling you, and I'm telling you here and now, now is a great time to go into business. And it's a great time to invest in the market. Friday would have been better, but today's still a good day. And I
Yeah,
think you're
yeah,
going
yeah.
to
I agree with you. I bought on April 9th, which is very close to very bottom. So
Yes, well, there you go. Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, any time in there to shift funds and buy would have been a great idea. Things had dropped dramatically, and everybody wants the same. At the end of the day, everybody wants the same thing. Everybody wants a roof over their head, food on the table. They want a good living. They want peace. They want to, grow their family. It's just things get out of touch. They get out of hand. Everybody goes a little bit nuts. But rest assured, human beings, human nature is we all come back together again. It's
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
having
yeah, you're
like
right.
having that fight with your friend, and then you realize the next day how foolish it was, and you phone up and you make up. Right now, the world's making up, and now is a great time to be in business, and it's a great time to invest, and it's a
Since you're
great time.
optimistic.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
it is. It
yeah.
is. I feel it.
Um,
In fact, I'll make the statement. I think right now is probably as good a time. Almost the only other time that was probably better than now was probably right after World War II. There was a huge acceleration of business. But I would tell you, short of that, I'm going to tell you that historically, I think right now, now is probably will be the second best time to go into business.
yeah. So David has a question, but Aaron put a question in the chat. So David, you'll go after Aaron. So
Sure.
Aaron, can you read? I encourage you to say it out. I don't have to read. I want more people speaking. Yeah, Aaron.
Oh, hi, is the microphone okay?
Yeah.
Yep.
Hi. So, I recently just started a small nutraceutical brand that sell things like mineral and vitamin. When it comes to like the product selections, what we base on is that we look at the data on Amazon, and we notice that for some of the product, like the big name brands occupy uh like they dominant. They occupy like 90% of the sale, while
Yep.
in other category, like they're more spread out so that like the smaller brand has some choice. And that's how we select the product. Do you think this is like the right way to select for the product, or is there any issue with this way?
So there's both pros and cons to that. So it's great to look at the market trend, and if Amazon's trending where it's the most popular product, it's great. Here's the challenge you have, okay? If it's trending as the best product or the best category of product, the chances are there's a lot of congestion in that field. There's a lot of competition, right? So when you look at it, what I would do is say, okay, this is where the trend is. There's a lot of product in here. We should hop on this bandwagon and go for it. There's a few questions I would be asking myself. Is there a way, and I'll ask you this question now, is there a way in which you can feel like you can disrupt or a way in which you can differentiate your product from theirs?
So, not by the product itself. So by the product itself, it have a higher potency, but I don't think this is the key point. I think the marketing strategy and how we promote on the like the e-commercial platform is the key.
I agree with you. I think, though, that the messaging has to feel for the person that somehow they're getting something that's either like there's three aspects to business: price, quality, service. In the old days, we used to say price, quality, service, pick any two of the three because you can't have all three, right? But still, there is the case to be made that you possibly can. So the question is, look at price, look at quality, look at service. The product is the product, so it's a certain quality, right? Is there any way that you can make a representation? Because you mentioned potency. Can you make a representation that the quality as an example, of your product is slightly better? Is the price slightly better? Can you ship the product faster? So these are the things. There's only three things. It's the price, quality, service, and you've got to decide, is there a way in which you can compete with those three things with your product to make it the most attractive to a person out there? In addition to that, I'd also look at things like bundling. Okay. Are there things that potentially you can sell with that product in a bundle that makes the bundle look really, really amazing? In other words, if you're going to buy, I'm trying to think of a really good example, but if you were going to buy accessories for your car and someone was selling a snow brush, but somebody else was selling, a snow brush and floor mats and maybe wiper fluid, and they put it all together in a package and they made it very economically viable that, hey, if you bought all three of these things, you can make savings on each one. So bundling is another way of looking at of possibly selling your product. But those are the only ways. I mean, when it comes down to it, there's price, quality, service. So you got to decide is how can we compete, and better. That's if you're going direct competition. Um, then there is bundling, and the third would be the possibility of differentiating. And again, I know right now as we sit here, you say, well, no, it's the same mineral, it's the same product, maybe a little more potency, but I'm challenging you. I'm saying to you, okay, maybe it is, but I'm challenging you and I'm saying to you, no, if I was owned the company, I'd come back and say, you by tomorrow morning or by the weekend, you tell me how we can differentiate this product, at least in the mind of the consumer. How can we differentiate this? How can we make our product the more attractive, whether it's just something about it in terms of its quality, its price, the service we deliver? How can we do this better? I'll give you another example. This goes back a lot of years ago, and this is based on a book by William Uchi called Theory Z, and it's basically the Japanese style of business back in like the 70s and 80s, which still today exists. Um, and the whole idea was, as an example, with automotive parts, right? People who sell automotive parts. Well, what happened was everybody was saying, okay, well, you have an automotive part. We all have the same part, right? So everyone was selling parts, and the automotive shops would call up the manufacturers and they'd say, hey, I need this part, this part, this part, and this part. Standard delivery on the parts was next morning. So anytime you phoned on a Monday, it was delivered first thing Tuesday morning. All deliveries were first thing in the morning, right? This was a standard in the industry for years and years and years and years. So an automotive company came along and said, we can disrupt this marketplace by offering 2 hour or 4 hour windows. We can give the option that the automotive place can get the part in 2 hours, 4 hours, or next morning as they're used to it. And we will charge a little bit more, even though the part costs the same. The part's the same thing. The only thing differentiating the part was they could get it in 4 hours or they can get it in 2 hours. So when they began thinking about it, and you begin thinking about the customer who needs that part, like all of a sudden you take your car in at 10 o'clock, you want it back by the end of the day, and the person says, oh no, you're going to be out the car for 2 days. Well, that was terrible, right? So now all of a sudden, an automotive, like one of the shops could turn around and say, hey, you know what? We're going to get all our parts in 2 hours. We'll pay an extra 20%. But what we're going to tell our customers is that we guarantee you, if you bring your car in before noon, you'll have it back the same day. They made a killing. They made a killing. They got to charge the same part, 20% more, okay, to the retailer, and then the retailer got to charge the customer a bit more. Everybody won, and the customer got what they wanted. Was they paid a little bit more money, right? But they got their car back within, 2 or 4 hours instead of a day. So that's an
Hmm.
example for you, a really good example for you. I'll give you another example. Let's say you owned a hotel, right? And you sell your rooms. People come in and they pay a nightly rate. Well, I would argue that the cost of a hotel room on a per night basis, how often does that change? Every night, right? You pay 150 one night, you pay 850 the next night, 550 the next night. It's the same room. It's the same inventory. Why are you paying more? Anybody? Why do you pay more for a hotel room one night and less the next night?
Demand.
Right. It's all about demand. So what is it about your product where you can think of these ideas? What is it that, if somebody, you see, you have what you don't do is you don't put yourself enough in the eyes of the consumer, right? If I was buying your product right now, and I'm going to ask you this question, don't be the seller, be the buyer. If you are buying your product, what would excite you more about buying this product? Is it the packaging? Is it the fact that you could get it same day? Is it the fact that you could get it within an hour? Is it the fact that it's slightly more potent? So these are all the questions you need to ask. They're tough questions. If it was easy, everybody'd be doing it. It's not, it's hard, right? But I would challenge you to become the customer, not the seller, and figure out from the customer perspective, what is it that they want? What do they want out of this that would make them really much more excited than buying the competitors, which is sitting right beside it in this very, very busy area you're talking about, because it's a very popular area, right? So how can you stand out differently? These are the questions that I'm just challenging you. These are the questions that you need to ask yourself in terms of, from the user perspective, not from the buyer perspective. So I always encourage people, whenever you're providing a product or service, become your customer. Figure out what it is a customer wants, not what you want. Does that help at all?
Yes, I'm actually very glad that you mentioned the strategy of bundling and also like the look of the product. So our team actually put some effort on it because like unlike other product the like the natural health product has a expiry date and it has a minimum order quantity from the factory.
Right.
It's kind of difficult to switch from product to product, but what is easier to do is changing the label, changing the look of it. So our team actually designed like they designed two versions. One is
Yeah.
a more serious, more like the normal nutraceutical packaging on the market. Another one is more tasty and the color is more bold. So what I'm thinking here is making two version at the same time. So when we promote it to the retailer, and we can say like what the retailer would choose and which one would sell better over time. Because as a small brand, we might not have that much money to do the marketing research before we launch the product, and we honestly don't know like what the customer would like. So I think probably this is a solution.
It's one solution. Some other solutions I'm just thinking about as you're talking is, have you considered engaging with influencers?
Yes, but like by starting with that, it could be kind of costly, but we definitely consider this direction.
Yeah. There is a website out there. I'd have to get the exact information. It's one of my it's a young kid that I watched from the day he was born and grew up. He's got a very successful company where they actually sell, in fact, influencers basically. And I'm just the name has just totally escaped me. But if you drop me an email or I think of it, I can share it back. I'll find out for you. But just drop me a line or an email, and I'll get you the company. But basically, they have all different kinds of levels of influencers. They have the smaller influencers with 5 or 10,000. They have the bigger ones, 100,000 or millions. Um, and basically, what you can do is you can kind of you submit your product, and you pick the 2 or 3 influencers that you might think would be the best. They look at the product, they decide if they want to back it, and then you make a deal with them. And sometimes they're not crazily expensive. Or what you might be able to do is make a deal with them. Just say to them, look, we can't afford to obviously pay you much. We can give you maybe something, but at the end of the day, what about if we just cut you in, a piece of the action of everything that we sell? If they're really, really good and wonderful people and you get along, you might even cut them in for a small piece, give them, an equity position at some point. But you don't want to, if you don't have to do that, you don't want to. But the whole idea would be is maybe finding an influencer who does maybe charge some money and just say to them, look, in lieu of charging money, look at our product. Tell me what you think. And if you really, really like it, would you consider taking a percentage of each sale? And see what happens and just try it out, try it in the market and see if it works out. And if they make enough, you make enough, everyone's happy, you can grow your company very quickly. So There are different deals that you can make with influencers, and there are companies that sell influencers. So that's one thing you could do. But I think also look and feel and touch, smell, all that stuff. I think it is very, very important. I'm not an expert in that area, but I know that there are certain brands that sell better simply because they look better, and that would be an important decision in terms of the look and feel of your product that you're selling as well. So I think, hopefully some of that's been helpful. If I come up with any other ideas, I'm happy to,
It's
of
very
course, will.
helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's David's turn. Yeah, David.
Yes, thank you very much. Awesome. Thank you very much, Martin. So I'm a financial advisor for business owners. I'm help them for the wealth management and also for the capital raising and merger and acquisition. My question is that how should we work with our big brother, which is the US, the state, and how should we position ourselves? Since they say you mentioned about the technology in the past 20, 30 years, local level and BlackBerry something whenever we have the great technology and then the US they buy it out and financial the same. If you have to raise the capital, it's far larger from the US private equity and the other things. So should we position ourselves to stand as the law of America so that we may embrace the resources from the US, or we should focus with our unique resources with Canada? So how should we do in these two setups?
Okay, so you're probably talking about my most favorite topic, and I'm very, very opinionated on this topic when it comes to business. And again, this isn't a nationality, a cultural decision. This is simply an entrepreneurial business decision. Everybody I mentor, I push very, very hard to do business in the US. Um, just my quick story is I started out in Canada. I did, we were very successful here. It took 10, 15 years, but I started in 1975 when I was 19 years old. And I recognized in 1987 that the market was really in the US, and I opened an office in Los Angeles, and the rest was history. My company ended up roughly doing about 98% of our business was US based and 2% was Canada. We still own the Canadian marketplace, but we also own the US marketplace. And 98% of my company, or the revenue from our company, came from the US. There's there's a whole bunch of factors. I won't go into all of them, but there's a whole bunch of factors of why whatever service and product you have, you really do not want to ignore the US marketplace. For starters, it's 10 times the size. Not only that, but the US consumer is a very different than the Canadian consumer, very different. And I'll say it the way I believe, and I'll say it the way it is, because I'm here to help you. I'm not here to. This isn't really, although it's an opinion, it's not an opinion. I'm here to help you, and the only way I can help you is by telling you that the U.S. consumer is a much easier customer to sell to. They are more open to trying products. They're more open to saying yes or no. They're much more decisive. And I can tell you that from 50 years. This July 31st will be 50 years of business. And I can tell you in 50 years, um, I have problems. And again, I love my Canada. I grew up here. I employed a lot of people here in the hundreds, and I love Canada and I love it dearly. And I do anything for our country. But when it comes to business, heading south of the border for most products and services is absolutely advisable. And I always push companies to do that. There's one in particular, actually more than one. There's actually three right now. Two that were Canadian, one that is already in the US. But the two that are Canadian, I pushed them very hard and got a lot of reluctancy from them, pushed them very hard. And if you went back to both these companies today, you'd find out one is transitioning from about I'm going to say 30% US business. They'll transition within the next year or two. They'll be at 90%, and the other one is already 90% plus. And they were 100% Canadian when they first met me. So, in answer to your question, if I understood it correctly, I would really focus very heavily on the US. Private equity and VC are much more inclined to you're much more inclined to get investment dollars there because there's just a lot more. There's 10 times the amount of money, 10 times the amount of people. Just the numbers alone indicate that. So if you put aside your opinions politically, religion, put all that aside for the moment. Just talk pure business. You got a marketplace that's 10 times the size, and I would say it 5 to 10 times more receptive of trying products, of making decisions, and just much easier to sell to. I will say this, if you can master your product in Canada, if you can do really well here, the chances are you can do 10 times better there. It's not the case that if you have an American company and you're doing really well there, that you can do well in Canada. In fact, and if you go back to the experience curve, look at the number of US companies that have opened here that have failed. It's astronomical. Look at the number of companies that are Canadian that have failed in the US. It's almost non-existent. Almost everybody, a lot more succeeded than failed. So Canada is a challenge because it's hard to make money here. But if you can do it here, just imagine what you can do there. Does that answer your question? Or
Yeah,
did I get
there are another one. So if it is, let's say we are Canadian, most of the time I stay in Toronto. I think I'm busy here. How could I break through at the U.S. market for this kind of financial and capital PE and VC? I have started to travel to U.S. a little bit more often, but I'm not the U.S. I'm not the yeah. So how any tips suggestion?
Yeah. So first and foremost, two things happening right now that you may or may not be aware of, and I've become a resident expert on this. So this is something I do have an expertise on. First of all, you can spend up to 6 months there. I know there's an expense involved with that, but I'm putting expense aside for the moment. You can spend up to 6 months there every year. The second thing is there's a legislation going through the U.S. right now. I don't know how well known it is, but it's called if you're over 50, and I don't know that you are, but if you are over 50, there's something going through called the Canadian Snowbird Act, which it's been introduced into legislation. It's going through, the next steps are it goes through the House, it goes through the Senate, and then it gets signed by the president. How long that will take, it might be a year or two, I don't know, but that will allow you actually now as a Canadian to go into the US for 8 months of the year. That's though not as necessarily a business person, although if you are selling product or services there, not necessarily working for a company there, you can technically be there if you're just a salesperson selling stuff, right? There's nothing, you're not working for a company there. So it's a very fine line. And again, if you want to contact me, I'll explain the difference because I did it for years. Is that if you're going there and just trying to sell people, you're a Canadian company going into the U.S. sell, you'd still be basically can be there on a personal visa, a B2. There's also something called an E2. Are you familiar with E2?
No.
Or okay, so there's something called an E2, which is very popular right now. Again, it requires a bit of an investment. It's not $1 million investment, but you do have to put in, you have to set up a business in the US. Usually you have to invest, they say 100,000, but that 100,000 can be very much manipulated. You can even the legal fees can be part of that 100,000. So if you have to spend 15,000 to get your E2, that's part of the cost. And you don't even have to spend the money. You just have to say you intend upon spending the money. You can, with the right company, and there's a few of them I can recommend to you, you can get an E2. What that allows you, and it's a little bit tricky, but because you want to be very careful about your residency services, in other words, where they consider you to be a resident, because the last thing you want to become is a US resident, because then they tax you on your global income. But basically with an E2, you can pretty much spend 7, 8, even 9 months down there and still prepare the appropriate paperwork that says your main presence is still in Canada. Therefore, you're not a US resident, and therefore you're not, US taxable. So you can actually open a business there. From an immigration perspective, you can spend 5 years there and then renew for another 5 years. You can be there permanently. But from a tax perspective, it's different. And you're going to only spend probably about 7 to 9 months each year there. But you can get away with having your lawyer file a form that basically says, hey, you're there, you're doing business, but your residency is still Canada. So from a tax perspective, you'll be okay. So these E2s give you the opportunity to open a business in the States and operate there and be there a lot. If that's a way. So there's an E2, a B2 that you can extend. They've now got reciprocity now with the Canadian government if this Canadian Snowbirds Act. So again, this is a
Yeah.
longer-winded answer, but it's something I know a lot about. I'm happy to help you with. And having said all of that, if expense is a problem for you, you're sitting saying, well, it's great, except I can't, afford to be there, 5, 6, 7 months of the year, then you've got to use technology. And then you've got to basically, be on Zoom calls, be marketing yourself as much as possible. I'm sure you're probably trying to do this, but the whole idea would be you get your face on Zoom as much as you can, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you try and sell your services or whatever you're trying to do and try and just focus on the US marketplace and get to people and say, hey, this is what I'm doing. This is how I'm working it. And you just get as many people, through Zoom. And eventually, as your business grows, you have a little bit more money, you spend a little bit more time in the US. But in answer to your overall question, the US is an incredibly favorable market, especially for Canadians. And if it's a place that you can get yourself into, it's a place you can make an awful lot of money, do it quickly, and be in the right place at the right time. So again, were there other questions that you had? I don't know if this has been helpful or not. I'm trying as best I can, but
Yeah.
there are some limits. If you can't be there, then you have to really use technology, and Zoom or I should say video conferencing of any kind is a great way to do it.
Great. I don't want to use up all the time today. Have other people. So how can I reach you? By email or?
So
I'll pass my email to you. Yeah, I'll
Okay.
pass
just
Martin
pass
email.
my email. You can give
Yeah.
I don't even mind if you give my phone number. Just pass my email, phone number. I'm happy to talk to anybody. If I can help anybody at all, I'm happy to do it.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. So next is Jay, then after David, then let's see time. So question of David, I cannot guarantee you get answered. Yeah, but Jay, go ahead, please.
Hi, Martin.
Hi.
Nice to meet you again. Yeah, so I went to your last workshop and the one I think it's last year. And
So you made the same mistake twice.
November, last November.
oh, yeah,
Three
that's
times you made the
November.
same mistake.
I've learned a lot. Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you. So I don't, yeah, this could be a question. So originally I was wondering about hearing your reason about starting the business. This is the best time. And it's kind of also related to my new pivot. So I don't know if you remember, I last year was thinking about like starting my business as a coach, and then essentially I this year I'm pivoting well, not completely, but I'm pivoting pretty heavily into actually to building an AI agent of a coach, a business agent, business coach, or business partner for small business.
Great.
So that's kind of like echo with the AI trend that you were talking about, and
Yes.
everyone should be getting on board. So I'm getting on board, I guess.
Fantastic. And I think that you see that's a great pivot because what you're doing is last year I remember we had the conversation, you were thinking about going into coaching. And as I may have mentioned back then, it's a very competitive area. Because one of the reasons is, and I mentioned it in the presentation earlier tonight, coaching is a great area to get into. The problem is it is a low barrier to enter. So it means there's a lot of people in it, and it's hard for people to discern who's a good coach versus not. So a lot of it's based on testimonials. So that particular business, you want to be thinking about testimonials. You want to be thinking about the number of people that you can put up on your website or the number of people that you can use that when you're talking about other people that you can reference to them and say, look, don't ask me. Ask these three people how I was able to help them. So testimonials are very, very pivotal in your business. But I love the transition. So there's a transition of saying AI is coming along. It's just what we talked about earlier. It's like I got you to. It's almost like I got you to ask this question or make this
Yeah.
pivot. So it's great that you're now thinking, okay, well, AI is the next, what I call the elephant in the room. AI is the next big thing. How can I incorporate that? So an AI coach would be fantastic. Now, again, here's the challenges, right? So what are your strengths? The strengths are that you've been thinking about this a while. Let's say your strengths are you're a good coach. Let's say the strengths are that you can train your AI in a really good way. And you could build something really great. So there's some strengths. What's the weaknesses? Well, the weaknesses only probably is, are you the great coach? Is your training of AI going to differentiate you from everybody else that's training an AI to be a coach? So that's your weaknesses. The opportunity absolutely is there. Um, the threat the threat is the threat is that there will be a lot of people that are going to be using AI, and they'll use it for everything, including
Yeah.
coaching. So the real question for you is, again, going back to how do you differentiate yourself? And how do you disrupt that market? So first and foremost, um, I would invite you to be your user, be your client, and figure out from a client perspective, when you create this AI coach from a client perspective, what is it that you want out of it as a client? What is it, you're now a client of your company. What is it that you can do? What is it you want? And so again, what we get back to is this whole idea of the AI, the AI coach that you have can probably give some incredibly great advice, really good advice, and they can basically communicate, well with that person. They can give them good advice. But what's the element? What's the element that's missing
Yeah.
that makes your company a little different? Well, in my opinion, that element is the emotional support that you might be able
Mhm.
to provide to complement your AI coach, right? So
Yeah.
it's not just the AI coach, it's the AI coach with the emotional and mental support that, well, not so much mental, but it's
Yeah.
the emotional and the passion support that you provide that AI is going to take a long time. You're not even when you get to ASI, which will take, probably 5, 7, 10 years, and you know what, probably take longer. Even when you get to the artificial super intelligence, you're still not going to probably be able that AI coach won't be able to provide that emotion. They'll still probably
Mhm.
be more or less a good guide. They'll probably be able to give the same answers, but will they be able to do it with emotion and passion? So I think if you complement it, right? Complement it with that side that says, um, you're going to have both. You're going to have some brilliant, brilliant coaching, some brilliant guidance, and you're going to have me there as a support person. What do you do at 2 a.m. in the morning when you're just ready to quit? When everything's gone wrong that day, your partner's, basically mad at you. Your personal partner's mad at you. The government's just found out that you owe more taxes. You've had a rotten day, you're going to call the AI robot, right? At that time, you can be that person. It's almost like being a sponsor, right? You can be that person's sponsor. So maybe you play the role of being that complementary person to the AI,
Mm. Yeah.
the AI coach, and fill in
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
the.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I think that's something. So what I'm thinking about is actually focusing on small business owners and entrepreneurs. So for them to have the more user-friendly coaching, not only coaching like personal coaching, but more like business coaching and like not all numbers and like when you get into business, it's like whenever you touch anything, it's like a lot of theories, a lot of numbers throwing at you, and then you have to figure out all everything, and it's overwhelming. So, and what I'm thinking is, I can blend the emotional, like human touch, and the quick, like personalized solutions and learning curves, and to like smooth the learning curve. This is kind of like my idea, and I think I'm like been working in the AI field, so it feels like have a shot. I hope so. But one thing I've been thinking is if I want to get into the US and I'm not, yeah, I'm, yeah, so how much adaptation that I need to do in terms of being able to like, adapt it to a US market.
Not much, because the reality is that's the beauty of North America is your AI coaching here will be I'm going to say it this way. It'll be the same in the US, excepting for maybe some of the rules and regulations, but the rules and regulations aren't the human side of it. Those are the facts and figures that AI has right now. Like you can go in right now to ChatGPT and get all that information. So the rules and regulations about, taxes, accounting, state legislation, federal legislation, all that stuff, it's all there. So that's easy. So I would say to you that it's very little adaption. And I would also suggest to you that because you're doing things arguably remotely, I think you just have to picture yourself sitting in Chicago, running your business.
Yeah.
And I think if you do that, all of this conversation goes away. See, the problem is you're fixated with, oh, here, I'm in Toronto. No, no, you're in Chicago. So now what are you going to do? So just picture yourself, you're in Chicago and you're running your business. Forget about where you are because there's no geography when it comes to the internet, right?
Yeah.
So you just do what you do, and do it as if you're sitting in the United States. That's what I did, and I just and eventually I ended up going more and more and more to the point where I was going 4, 5, 6 months of the year. But that's what you start out with. The same kind of answer to the other gentleman I spoke with earlier is you just put your mindset is that you're in Chicago and you're going to do 99% of your work. I'm guessing. Are you planning on how much personal connection are you planning on making in your business? If it's an AI coach, is this going to be all virtual, or are you planning some human touch?
Mm. Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, I think it could be a marketplace as well, so a connector. So you can have some starting point. Then we can also collaborate with other coaches
Yeah,
to
I mean, you can have that human touch by the way we're having it tonight. You don't need to
yeah,
necessarily
I'll
be there.
have like
Yeah, I mean,
webinars once a week or something like that.
yeah,
So
and these are business people. You don't have to hold their hand. Zoom call is perfect. They're used to it. They spend their whole life doing it.
yeah.
That's the way we communicate today. So I don't think it affects your business at all. I think and I think that the content pretty much remains the content as far as coaching goes. If you're talking about, um, uh, something in the financial arena specific to rules and regulations, that's a whole different story. But you're talking about coaching, and coaching is generally pretty much the same is in the US and Canada. So I wouldn't treat that as a problem. Your biggest challenge is going to be there's going to be companies, particularly the .ai companies. Those companies are going to come out with AI coaches as well, right?
Mhm.
And they're going to come out with models that are going to be very painful for you because the models will be, hey, for $9.99 a month, subscribe to me and you get your own personal coach. And it's going to be at a cost point. You're going to sit and say, how does somebody run a business this way, right? But having said that, there's also something said for being first in. So if you get started now and establish some clients, get them happy, you have some testimonials, you can still build a pretty good business.
Thank you. Yeah.
Their last question from David in the chat. David Horisina. Can you ask a question or do you want me to read the question for you?
I'll ask. Hello,
Hello, David. Yep.
Martin.
Yep.
I've studying about print on demand business. I'm wondering which district to incorporate in Ontario or a particular state in America. And yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good question. It's a good
I
question.
add a little bit to question. Before people usually incorporate in Dawel. Now even Elon Musk said it's to incorporate in Delaware is a bad idea. Can you talk about that? Same question. Yeah. Thank you.
So
Yeah.
Delaware used to be a great place to incorporate, and now it's more a good place to incorporate if you're a very large business. For print on demand, if you're incorporating in Canada, the choice really here is province versus federal. Um, there are certain advantages. I mean, federal gives you the opportunity to operate in every province, but there's certain downsides to it. If I was doing Canada, I'd probably just incorporate in Ontario, if it was Canada. If I was incorporating in the US right now, I would probably incorporate in either Florida or Texas. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. And it's not just a question of tax, it's a question of employment as well. So I don't know if you're planning on hiring people, but if you are, Texas and Florida are employer friendly. And the states is kind of divided into two different types of states. There's states that are employer friendly and states that are employee friendly. And Florida and Texas are both known very much as being employee employer friendly. So the other thing about if you do happen to do business in Florida right now, from an income tax perspective, income tax is 0%. And right now, Governor DeSantis is also considering, if you own property there, Governor DeSantis is also considering introducing legislation for zero property tax. So it's a both Texas and Florida are very tax-friendly places to be. But then you have to consider between the US and Canada, you have to consider what your residency is going to be. And are you going to operate in the States and live in the States? Are you going to operate in Canada? So the first question is where are you going to provide the services? The second question is where you're going to reside, and the third question is where you're going to pay your taxes and where you're going to immigrate to, right? So they're all connected. Unfortunately, there's no just clear answer to this, but if, as an example, I'll give you some examples. If I was going to decide to live in the United States, I would pick either Florida or Texas. I would incorporate there and I would pay my taxes there. As I said, for those reasons, in particular, Florida, it's 0% income tax. So you pay I think it's roughly about a 20% federal tax and 0% income tax. If I was to that's if I was, living in Florida, providing my product in Florida. If I was living in Canada, providing my product in Canada, I would probably incorporate in Ontario. If I was living in Canada and providing my product in the US, I'd probably incorporate in Ontario, possibly with a secondary incorporation in Florida or Texas. That's a very general statement. The question you've asked could take 2 hours to answer, dependent on, again, where you're going to produce your product, where you're going to produce the product or service, and where you're going to charge your tax to your clients, and where you're going to live, all of that kind of stuff. Do you know, like right now, you're obviously here. Are you going to remain a Canadian doing business print on demand?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And
And I
where are you going to provide the services, David?
like you said, the US is a 10 times larger market.
Yeah,
So I'm probably providing service to all 50 states.
right.
But
So
yeah.
I would probably argue that it might be worth the incorporation in the US and run it as a separate entity owned by a Canadian. But again, couple things. Yeah. Oh, it's really a complicated question. But I would incorporate in a state like Florida, Texas. That's the first thing. If you are going to incorporate in the US, that's where I would incorporate. Obviously, you're going to incorporate probably a company here as well. You got to pay taxes somewhere, right? So I would do that. It would be a Canadian company, but possibly incorporate it if you were going to do it on the US side, incorporate in Florida or Texas. One of the things you have to be a little careful about in your business is where you charge tax and where you don't charge tax, because that gets very blurred. It used to be, as an example, if you were incorporated in Florida and provided services to any consumers outside of Florida, that you didn't have to charge them tax. What happened was, is over the years, each state got a little bit smarter and said, if you're going to provide a certain percentage, and I forget exactly what it is, but a certain percentage of your sales is being provided in a state, you have to provide a tax return from a state perspective in each one of those states. That's if you follow the rules of the law, which I do. So I can't tell you what to do, but it does get a little bit blurred. The best possible advice I could give you is, because you really need current information, and even last year's information is no good. It depends on the state by state basis in terms of the way you tax people. So what I would probably do is get in touch with a good, and there's a few, and I can recommend a few to you, some good U.S. tax or U.S. accountants that either live in Canada, or they can live in Canada or the US, but they do taxes on both sides of the border. And I have a few of them that I've dealt with. I could give you recommendations on three companies. There's two individuals that are small companies, and then one much larger one. And I would have a conversation with them, even if you have to buy an hour of their time. They might give you a half an hour for free, but maybe buy an hour of their time and just say, look, this is what I'm wanting to do. This is the product I'm selling, and I'm going to be selling it. But in preparation for that meeting, know the answers to the questions I'm going to ask you, which is, what percentage of product are you going to sell in each state? And you almost have to do it state by state. So you have to know if you're going to sell 8% in Ohio, and 12% in Illinois, and 20% in California. You have to have a pretty good idea of what you're going to sell where, or at least give them an example. Say, this is what I think it's going to be. How am I best to set up? So it's really a question for a good accountant slash lawyer that does services on both sides of the border. And there's a few people that have it, but that's generally what I found, because I was the guy that did, I had both an American, I had both a US and a Canadian company for years. They were both Canadian owned. And when I sold my company, it was quite complicated, because we were bought by Warburg Pincus, which is a huge private equity company out of New York, and they had to buy both our Canadian and US company, and it was not a simple process. It took almost 2 years to do due diligence. It was pretty messy. But again, I would suggest, that's what I would recommend to you, is you'd incorporate probably in Ontario, um, and either you're a sole entrepreneur, you're either a sole proprietor that makes a personal return, or you're a corporation that makes a corporation return in Ontario, and or you could set up or not set up in the U.S. If you do, it's, I'd say, Texas or Florida, and then you really have to find. There's also there's other rules about reciprocity between U.S. and Canada. I don't want to complicate this or make it seem hard. Um, but there's something called, mark this down. Nobody will know this. Nobody will tell you about it. You really have to be knowledgeable about this stuff. It's called transfer pricing. So if you do set up in the US and you're running a company there, and you have the same type of company in Canada, you have to do, and don't make the mistake of not doing this, you have to do what's called a transfer pricing survey, and a transfer pricing study. And unfortunately, they can be quite costly. But what it does is it sets up the rules and regulations of the way that you collect tax and remit tax in both countries. And you have to do this transfer study and have it, so that if either the CRA or the IRS come back at you, one of the first questions they'll ask you is, say, do you have a transfer pricing study? And if you have it and you can prove, say, hey, yeah, I did the study and I'm paying the right taxes in the US and in Canada, then they will honor that usually, and you'll have no problems. If you don't have a transfer pricing study, um, then you can really be attacked, because the IRS can come back and say, well, wait a minute, you put all of your profits through in Canada and you paid all your taxes there, and and you're not showing any income in the States, and we think that your way too much revenue went to Canada, not enough went to the States. So it's called a transfer pricing study. If you do end up with two companies, one in the US and one in Canada, I'm sorry to make this complicated for you, but it's not. Unfortunately, it's just not simple. It just isn't. And having said all of that, I would definitely look at the U.S. market for any product or service as a favorable place to run a business. That I would. I don't care how much trouble it is. I don't care how much advice you have to go to or speak to these other people, but you can get pretty good, quick advice from these Canadian U.S. guys. A lot of them will probably provide it to you for free. You might have to engage somebody for a few $100 an hour, but get the advice before you do it, and don't forget to ask about transfer pricing.
Thanks. Thanks. I really appreciate that.
For inquiries, please contact info@eawlc.org or visit our website at www.eawlc.org.